This is one of the first treasures I ever got. Back in the early 90s, my dad and my grandma were walking along the beach in Ocean City, New Jersey, and my dad saw this sticking up out of the sand, and he picked it up and he gave it to me. Back in those days, you could see jagged iron and wood sticking up out of the water about a dozen or so yards off from the shoreline. It's no mystery what that was. That was the wreck of the old sailing ship Scindia, and this porcelain was from her hold. But it's very possible that this piece of porcelain was a part of a cover story for a crazy scheme hatched by the richest man in modern history. Now, okay, before you call me crazy, let me explain the history to you. The Sindia was built by Harland and Wolff, the same company that built the Titanic and the Olympic. The Sindia was hull number 204, launched in 1887. She was the largest steel-hulled, four-masted sailing vessel in history. In fact, the largest cargo ship in the world at the time. In those days, Americans, just like Europeans, were crazy about imports from Asia. Porcelain and oils and perfumes and jades was the anime of the 1800s. And the Sindia was one of the hundreds of clipper ships to meet those demands. Sailing between New York and Shanghai, China, and Kobe, Japan, she would have had to cross the Pacific, round Cape Horn, and then sail up the east coast of the Americas before entering New York Harbor. These were the days before the Panama Canal, so this kind of trip could take weeks or even months. It was on the final leg of one of these journeys in 1901, as she sailed along the coast of New Jersey, only a few hours from her destination, that she was wrecked. She had been braving a terrible December storm for the last few days, and reports indicate that her hull had actually started to break and she was taking on water. So Captain Mackenzie turned her into the shore, drove her up on the beach, and about 150 yards from the shoreline she grounded. It was well after midnight and the cold winter storm beat down on the city, but the Ocean City life-saving station sprung into action. At first they tried to launch rescue buoys, but the ship was now listing a little bit and they couldn't fix anything to it. They were forced to actually row out to the ship and pick up the crew. Within hours, the hull had completely broken and it was clear that the ship was a total loss. But despite this, the wreckage was actually not unstable. In fact, the captain and 6 of her crew actually opted to stay aboard and continue to man their posts. Now, here's where things get a little funny. The ship was sailing off course, and then it made a very abrupt turn into shore. Now, sure, okay, if the hull was broken, then that's an excellent reason to do so. But there was no sign of struggle, with the crew struggling to keep the ship afloat or really bring it in. In fact, some people doubt that the ship was even damaged. And it was brought up to the shore beautifully and stably, as if it was parked there. In fact, the head of the life-saving station used that term. He said it looked like the ship was conveniently parked. They actually walked up to it, and it was just sitting there stably. The cargo manifest lists everything you would see on a typical Chinese trading ship: jade, silk, ceramic, and porcelain, like this piece. But these were all picked up in Japan after it left China. In China, the crew picked up 20 tons of manganese ore. Again, why? As historians have pointed out, manganese ore was cheaper and higher quality in the United States. There's no need to import 20 tons. Well, in all the digging around the wreckage in the subsequent years and the sands on the site, no one has ever found any of that manganese. They found the porcelain, they found jade, they found silks, they found oils, but they've never found 20 tons or any of the 20 tons of manganese ore. When Scindia set sail from China, the Boxer Rebellion was just at an end. And throughout the fighting, Chinese temples were raided by, well, everybody and looted. There was a lot of money and goods changing hands illegally in China at the time and very easily up for grabs. Now the Sindia, despite her size, was bought cheap, and therefore she was an expendable commodity. The cargo, however, that was the prize. The ship may have been wrecked, but her officers still stood guard on her splintering decks. They all survived, including the ones who stayed with the ship even longer. In fact, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't even a single injury. Now, shortly after the wreck, but before the officers left their posts, the owners sent out a crew who quickly and quietly boarded her and stripped her of whatever it was the crew was guarding. But they left all the silk and jade and porcelain and anything else listed on the cargo manifest. Something was taken off that ship that was not written down. A lot of people speculate that it was actually 20 tons of silver coins, as many of them are still found to this day washing up on shore. The Scindia's owner, by the way, was J.D. Rockefeller, the richest man in modern history. And shortly after the wrecking, he had a sudden influx of capital that helped him finance expansion of oil fields into Texas, which helped him amass a fortune of $340 billion in today's money. Good for him, wow. The porcelain was, many believe, just a cover story for what the ship was truly carrying. Well, it sounds to me like Rockefeller bought the cheapest large cargo ship he could buy and used it to illegally import a massive shipment of silver coins from China, and then planned to have the crew wreck the ship just shy of the harbor in order to skirt customs, since the loot from overseas was considered contraband, and they'd probably heavily tax it as they do. Gosh, listen to me, my friends and I, we are some of the largest opponents of conspiracy theories about the Titanic that say that its owner J.P. Morgan deliberately sank the ship for profit, and yet here I am saying that the Scindia may have been sank for profit by her owner. Well, I mean, those things do happen, and of course in this case this is a much smaller scale and no one was hurt. It's very possible that that is exactly what happened in this case. For many, many years following the wreck, salvagers were scrapping the ship, ripping off pieces, and recovering items from the cargo hold to sell along the Ocean City boardwalk. Many people bought it. They sold like hotcakes. So a lot of the artifacts are in private hands now, but the Ocean City Historical Museum has put together a beautiful collection of pieces that they've collected over the previous century, including the ship's wheel, the ship's figurehead, as well as a replica figurehead and a beautiful model of the ship, as well as tons and tons of porcelain and other goods taken out of the cargo hold. They actually built a wooden pier out to the wreckage shortly after it struck. But over the years, the ship slowly settled down into the sand, sinking deeper and deeper. In fact, at one point, the government even buried it in sand, until finally just the mast was sticking up. People would play around it. They had a great time, but unfortunately none of that is visible today. Parts of the wreck were visible above the waterline until the 80s or 90s when my dad found this piece, but nothing is left today. That's a real shame. I wish I did get to see it before it disappeared. I've even tried swimming out to the site and diving under, but you just can't see anything anymore. It is yet another Harland and Wolff ship lost completely to the sea, but it still remains shrouded in mystery.